Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Harry. Welcome to another show. Once upon a time in London, the Tales of Network Engineer. Such a long title to say. We're going to have to shorten that title. So my name is Harry. I'm delighted to have a couple of people with me. Jan, how you doing? You okay?
Yeah, I'm good. Good, thank you.
Richard, all well?
Yep. Hi. Thanks, Harry. Thanks for inviting me today.
No problem. So today we're going to be talking about ZTNA, Zero Trust Network Access. Before we kick off, Jan, do you want to do a little intro just to the audience, just in case there's people that have joined today?
Well, I think everyone knows me by now. I'm Jan Kodabash, work for Universal Technology Solution, and I'm based out in London. And this is our 8th show, Harry.
Number 8, yeah.
Yeah.
8 Fridays in a row. We're just getting really good at this now. Richard, can you just do a little intro for everyone?
Yeah, so hi, Richard Fern. I work at a company called Nephos Technologies, also based in London. Been in and around the industry and vendors for more years than I like to remember. But had a good insight into many different technologies, be that networks, be that applications, security, and more recently decided to go into that integrator world to knit together different technologies to help customers around their business solutions.
Amazing. We've obviously been doing this show for it's the 8th show. I think on one of the last shows where we talked about network access control, this topic of ZTNA came up. So this is why we thought it'd be great to focus on this week. I mean, ultimately, the goal of all these talks is to look at these topics at a high level, then go deep down and kind of look at something with a new perspective and a new lens. But before we do that, is there anything we want to cover? Jan, Richard, anything you guys have been working on this week that's been of interest or you think you'd like to share?
So I've been looking at the white box space. I know that's been around for quite a while, but especially now that we're looking at NFV, the white box space becomes more relevant. So looking at the different product sets around that, with the view of adding some NFV solutions across it. So that's been a white box. I know I know what you're going to say. What is a white box?
What is all that?
Exactly what it sounds like. Yeah. So put it this way, it's not major vendor. It's not like a Cisco. It won't be so it's like a merchant type commodity based box.
I got you. Sounds good. How about yourself, Richard?
Yeah, we've been doing a lot around data governance for our clients and trying to help them, I suppose, understand the myriad of problems around data governance. And Jan and I were talking about this earlier around maybe it's another topic for the future to really demystify and help customers who don't have the resource or the skill set to get over real issues around data governance, because it's a big problem which is only getting bigger, because strange enough, the amount of data we're all creating and putting into different areas creates a whole host of issues for organizations from a compliance or a regulatory or even a business value perspective as well. So that may be an interesting area to talk later.
Definitely. I think, not to go into that too much, definitely one of the things I'd like to talk about, because I know we talked about data governance. Governance actually underpins a lot of successful solutions out there. Yeah. And maintaining it is really important. The word gets used quite loosely. I think what Richard and discussion what Nephos are doing is really, really interesting, because it's a service. Generally, people have it or try to adopt it internally without a lot of experience or. But yeah, definitely, Richard. I think we should do that.
Awesome. From my perspective, obviously I look at the whole world from a marketing, tech, branding, customer experience perspective. I noticed this week a particular app going quite viral. I don't know if you guys have seen it. It's called Lensa. I'll share my screen quickly, just so you guys can see what I'm talking about. So one of my friends, Tim, he kind of wrote a post about it saying, new Lensa app launched 4 years ago. It's now #1 in the App Store. It's downloaded 1.6 million times in November. You upload 10 photos of yourself, and with AI, it kind of, it produces your photo in kind of this more artistic Web3 meta, whatever you want to call it, version. And obviously everyone's interested in if I upload my photos into this, what's it going to look like? So suddenly, and almost this fear of missing out is coming in. So he's posted that. And then my other colleague, this is one of my other colleagues, who's the head of Gymshark. Well, he used to be the ex-head of Gymshark, and he's obviously got all these photos, which are quite funny. He wears a hat, so he's quite renowned for wearing a hat.
Now, is he usually quite skinny, and he's put those biceps on?
The biceps. I don't know how that's done, but
maybe for those, maybe I'll definitely do that.
But no, I thought I'd share that in terms of the fact that it's interesting how AI is popping up everywhere. AI chatbots, AI artists, and look at what humans are doing with this tech right now. We're just giving it selfies. But no, it's interesting. It's interesting. I think definitely a space to look out for. How it will influence B2B enterprise IT, I'm not sure, but I'm sure it will at some stage in the near future. But anyway, in terms of the subject today, everybody, ZTNA. Richard, could you kick us off with a high-level overview? If you could talk about this to like me, who has zero knowledge, that would be really cool.
Sure.
Starting point.
Yeah, we'll do, Harry. So if we look back, why ZTNA was created, reality is it's a technology which I suppose has been around for a long, long time. For those older people in the room, VPNs are a way that most people used to get access into a corporate network, VPN being the virtual private network, which is great. But the reality is a VPN invariably gives you full network access. So you're exposing your attack surface a lot wider if you're getting that remote access in. And this sort of then dovetailed into the conversation a couple of weeks back around network access control. So once you're in, what do you get access to? How do you control that lateral spread across a network if you've got an issue? How do you lock down the users that are coming into your network? So if you're providing a VPN, you fundamentally get full network access into the corporate network. Now that could be a big risk for an organization, but COVID's proven that actually the amount of people working remotely still need that full network access to a degree to be able to do their jobs. So ZTNA was really, I suppose, developed to get rid of the limited structure around VPNs and be able to be a little bit more context and logical aware around that user. So zero trust, in essence, building from the ground up of what do you need access to and who are you? Where's the context for that user? What time of day it is? What device they're coming from? Is it a corporate device, which they know is being managed from corporate infrastructure? Is it a BYOD device that they're coming in on their own machine? And fundamentally, is their phone trying to log in at the same time as their laptop, but they're in different parts of the country or different parts of the world? So it's trying to get all that context of the user trying to get access and trying to really limit down on what they really need to do, rather than, okay, here's a VPN, you've got full network access, fill your boots.
Okay.
So from that perspective, hence why the name Zero Trust Network Access. It's implicit access is not given to everybody. That implicit trust was taken away. The reality is we will give you the access on what you need rather than giving you everything, but also looking at the context of the user, the time of day, the device they're coming from, and sovereignty of data is important from a different location as well. So that's where Zero Trust has come from, that identity and context and logical based access. Some may remember SSL VPNs, which I suppose were the first iteration of a Zero Trust network access. And that is developed into this ZTNA, and it works quite nicely, ZTNA, because if you're American, it's ZTNA, which I don't think sounds quite as nice. So certainly ZTNA is a lot better.
With that, Richard, I mean, a couple of questions that come to my mind straight away around configuration. Like, it seems to me that, is that quite a difficult task to configure this to, make sure it's working for every single user in every single user case? And then my mind jumps to, potentially you could group the users, couldn't you, potentially by job and title? So, sure. I mean, how difficult is that for a business to be able to implement?
And that's a really good point, Harry, on the basis that you do really need to know your network, your applications, where your applications are. It may be on your network. It may actually be those applications are in the cloud somewhere. And this is where ZTNA comes in a lot more powerful than a VPN, because you're able to govern the usage of applications for users, no matter where the application is at the back end. But that configuration, you're right, you've got to get it done right. It's a framework. It's how are you trying to give access to users, be it your own users or be it third-party users, and making sure that you can get the right compliance you need inside your own organization to be able to provide that access without limiting people being able to do their jobs. So you could take a lot of the configurations that you have within existing SSL VPNs or VPN technology, and then limiting it down based on where that user is coming from. So there are configurations there which you can port into a ZTNA network.
Okay. So I think it's what I'd like to just add there or pick out, Richard, is that you mentioned about the framework. It is a framework. When we talked about this, or we talked about the topic, Harry, it's important, do you agree, Richard, that looking at this as merely one technology, it's not, it's actually built up and requires, actually going back to governance, it actually does require that piece to it. But ZTNA is a framework, and there's a lot of components, and we'll cover some of those as we go shortly.
And a lot of it, I suppose, is back to understanding what you've got. How can you configure, manage what you don't know? And the biggest problem that most organizations have, I suppose, is that sprawl to cloud. When it was in your own data center, applications to a certain extent were easy to manage because they're in your own control, your own domain. Then with the movement to cloud, or shadow IT as it was called in the early days before it was authorized by corporate, the reality is that there's applications corporates don't know necessarily that people are using. It could be Lenser.ai, for example.
Yeah.
People are off using their corporate devices using Lenser, and suddenly all the bandwidth's being consumed by people uploading their selfies to Lenser.ai and then getting all these caricatures back.
So would you say then, whereas previously, before everything went up to the cloud, we were able to have that control, that visibility at certain aggregation points. Networks were quite involved in that. We had points. Now that we're kind of moving things to cloud, and some of it is being a lot more of our technology being collapsed and happening in containers, or within a consolidated host. Yeah, we lose that a little bit.
Yes.
So do you see that's where ZTNA comes in, into its own a little bit more?
Absolutely, Jan. Yeah, you've got a much more dynamic environment for security and networks to manage, which makes it exceptionally difficult, especially with old technologies such as VPN, which are very draconian in the way they give access. The reality is ZTNA is much more flexible. It is much more agile. It gives you the ability to be much more progressive in regards to agility within the business, to be able to enable people to use applications while making sure that the corporate organization as a whole is secure.
Okay. So what I'd like us to do is just kind of have a look at, and actually, first of all, just start with, we spoke about NAC, or even before that, RBAC, NAC, ZTNA. Do you see this now just becoming an evolution of those? And if we were to kind of start with a simple, just to give some people maybe a view of what it would look like, how would, say, an enterprise with 2 head offices, some branch sites, what kind of architecture would they need, or topology would they need? How would this kind of look? High level.
Yeah, and it will be at high level. Don't forget I'm a salesman.
Yeah.
At high level, I mean, the first component that you've got is really a broker, and that broker could be a landing page on a service provided by a ZTNA provider, and that broker will then do the interrogation on the endpoint. So that's your gateway into corporate services, be they on premise or be they in the cloud. At that point, that brokers do that interrogation. It will look at the machine. It will understand what the machine is like, be it Windows, Mac, whether it's corporate device, whether it's a BYOD device, what sort of operating system it's got on it. So you're trying to interrogate that device to be as secure as possible with understanding what that device is doing. So that broker gateway, once it's done that check, and if it's not up to corporate standard, it may then say, right, your machine isn't up to corporate standard, either it needs an upgrade, so we'll give you an upgrade before you can get access, or actually we see it's a BYOD device, and we'll only give you access to these components.
Right.
So that broker passes the information over to, in essence, the ZTNA engine, which enables them to build that connection between the user and the corporate services products that they're providing out to their client base.
Right. So if I understand this right, then where previously we talked about NAC, and NAC we have the control of the edge. It's the actual edge that actually does the broker piece. You'd like, with ICE. This is now where we don't have physical access to these. The broker kind of acts as our edge in a location, a remote location, or somewhere across the internet, or something like that. So kind of doing the same thing as that.
Yeah.
So going one step back from a broker, is this something that people would have as a host, or an app, like a small app on their host that's doing it, or is it a kind of baked into your application? What kind of things are being presented to this broker? What are we having to do?
I think
something on the edge?
that's some of the value of a ZTNA component. You've got those different options. You either may have a physical app sat on the endpoint device, which the user has to log into. You could even use the login on a Microsoft Windows laptop, for example, and that can then immediately go and talk to the broker to be able to gain access through. Or it could be purely just a web landing page, which obviously you're going to use for BYOD devices, because you're not necessarily managing that endpoint device, because it's the user's own personal device. So you could just have a physical landing page, which again, from a corporate perspective, that's less secure than having a corporate device with an agent on the end of it, which you've got a little bit more control of to protect your data at the end of the day.
Right. And what about the piece where if we're kind of getting one step even further granular, where we want an application, do we get in the realms of actually now getting into the application and kind of rewriting some type of piece of the application so it's doing it, or it's presenting some type of credentials?
Yeah, obviously you need to hand off the authorization that's come through from the broker side, because the client in essence still needs to authenticate against that application. Yes, you've interrogated them, but they still need to send their authorization details through to the application to make sure it works. Now, that may need some form of configuration change potentially, but I think with the newer version of cloud apps, that handoff between the broker and the end application is much more efficient, because you've got much more standard type of handoff authentication between the broker and the cloud apps. Whereas if you are dealing with a legacy application, there could potentially be problems where you're trying to hand off that authentication, and there may be some issues which would need some development at the back end.
Yeah, I could see that getting a bit nasty when you're having to do that with legacy applications. So
and if those legacy applications are on-prem, then potentially the easiest way is, okay, these legacy applications will give you full network access to gain access to those applications, so the credentials can get passed straight through from an authentication direct from the user client to the end application, the legacy application.
Okay, so are there, if we go on to, that's kind of like a high level, there, I didn't, maybe in another call we could discuss, even granular than that in terms of processes of each of these applications and being able to trust those processes. But are there, if we talk about some of the components and vendors that are, when we talk about ZTNA,
it's interesting because you've got your old traditional vendors who've moved into the market space, either through development of a technology or through acquisition.
It does seem like that now. Wherever there's a service, or whether it's a buzzword or new technology, everyone has their version of it. But What about some of the newer ones? I mean, we know, all of the, unless they are some of the leaders.
Yeah, so I think some of the new ones, without doubt, you can look at the likes of Cato Networks, who are quite an interesting company because they do both an overlay and an underlay technology to make that much more optimized for organizations. Or you've got I suppose the CASB type vendors, so the Netscopes and the Zscalers, where they're an overlay technology on use either the internet or your own backbone to transit between the applications as well. And it's interesting because there's still a heck of a lot of consolidation going in the market space, because a lot of the smaller CASB, ZTNA type vendors, in essence, are being snapped up, to your point, Jan, by organizations that haven't got time to develop, so they go and acquire to buy into that market space. And is ZTNA a feature as well? It's a bit like CASB was. Everyone's saying, no, CASB is a product. Is it maybe just a feature of a bigger framework that you should be doing in your organization anyway?
So I do like that fact. Well, I see a benefit of that, where those service providers or the vendors are using an underlay and overlay, because this is actually extending the reach point further than your campus. It's good that they've got that underlay knowledge, whether they're a service provider or something like that. So that's always useful for ZTNA because you're trying to extend it, and they've got that capability as well built in.
Yeah, and I think it depends on the customer's journey as well. So predominantly, if you look at ZTNA when it's brought out in the first place, it's around VPN replacement. That was for branch office or remote workers. And if you look at ZTNA, what it can provide in the bigger, I suppose, core technology component with things like security service edge, you need that marrying of time, the alignment of the stars, right time of year with the right wind and everything else of both your VPN contract and your MPLS contract ending at exactly the same expiry date to take an underlay and overlay vendor. So I think if you've got an MPLS contract, it's great that you can run overlay technology over the top of that. It gives you that inflection point of, do we invest in another VPN technology, or do we actually look at something more granular? If we know our workers are moving more remotely and getting to cloud applications as well as legacy on-prem applications. And fundamentally, you've got to have that potential delineation between the overlay and underlay, which the likes of Cato can do. You can run as an overlay, for example, on an existing MPLS underlay, or you go with just a pure overlay vendor like of Netscope and Zscaler to be able to run that overlay over your chosen underlay. It makes it flexible enough to be able to have that control while transitioning to a new technology as well, which I think is really beneficial. It
is, and although the technology that it brings is great, it's that visibility that where you would go for with a like a legacy telco, you just don't have that. The only ability you've got is phoning them up and saying, did I drop some or what path did I take? Or you got to overlay your own tool. So that's why I think that area, even if that's their first going in point of your journey into ZTNA, I think that's well worthwhile looking at.
Yeah, and I think certainly that mid-market area as well for organizations that don't have the skill set as well, Jan. For the overlay and underlay vendors come into their own as well, because it can take a lot of that configuration and network problems away from them if they have the skill set or the resources to be able to manage it. So there's arguments for both, depending where you are in your journey, what size organization you are, and what resources and skill set you've got as well.
So I mean, we said Zscaler and Cato. Who are some of the I mean, I'm going to name, Cisco have a solution, Palo Alto have a solution. Are we seeing them just jump in and develop their own, or do you think it's an obvious decision for some companies who are already heavily invested in say Cisco or Palo Alto?
And I think that the security component has driven a lot of the traditional vendors into that market space, because they have to. If they can't compete, they've got to be able to develop quickly or have to acquire. If you look at ForcePoint, for example, they acquired BitGlass, which are labeled as a CASB/ZTNA provider. And that's the way that Forcepoint got into that market space and be able to develop, I suppose, their ZTNA strategy. If you look at Cisco, they've taken a lot of their existing security technologies and built around their ZTNA component of how they're delivering ZTNA. If you look at the Broadcom side, Symantec, the Secure Access Cloud from Symantec was pre-Broadcom acquisition, and they just continued to develop that and built that round Google Cloud to be able to deliver their underlay through that component as well. So it's got to be for most people to drive towards that goal, really.
And there you'll always find, we've seen that over the years where there's been acquisitions for that. The problem I see is that once the acquisition is done, are they allowed to carry on and develop along that path, or do they stop just because now we've got that product set? So not to go into that too much, but it's good if they do acquire and acquire a technology, but allow it to continue on that progress, and not just stop and say, we've got this if you want it.
And I think thankfully a lot of the big tech vendors have realized the error of their ways historically, to your point, buying tech and we will no longer develop, and some of them have actually acquired technologies and enable them as I suppose, to run a business within a business. Meraki is a prime example within Cisco. Which I think they've done a great job with, and be able to continue to develop the Meraki platform. Because that's what they bought it for, was to grow the business, not just to get that tick box to onto an RFP.
And I know I knew we'd soon run out of time, but I just wanted to cover just go back to two things. One is, now that we've spoken about the technology and how an kind of architecture would look like. I'd like to start off with, we both talked about, is that even before you get on this journey and look at developing this, what kind of principles or framework, how important is that to start off with what you're actually trying to achieve?
It's immensely important, because actually if you don't understand that base core component, you'll potentially create more problems for the business in the future.
But who gets involved in that? I mean, that was my second question was, where does it sit? Is it network security? You want to look at, you've been told, we need to be doing ZTNA, but straight away people start going and looking at, bringing vendors in, but maybe starting in the, in the boardroom and just having a look at what your framework governance, but who gets involved in that?
And I think actually we're starting to see the merging of IT functions by collaboration, and without doubt it's got to start with the application. Rudimentally, what's remote access? It's remote access to get into an application, be it a file server, be it a physical application, be it a cloud application. That's what you're trying to give ZTNA strategy for remote workers or branch office workers, to be able to get access to your applications easy. So you've got to understand what they're trying to get access to, and this is where I suppose most organizations struggle with that. With the advent of migration to cloud, is, do they know which applications their users are using, or how many people are using cloud applications under the radar and what were known as shadow IT applications historically? So you've got to go and investigate. And CASB technology, for example, helps build that picture of which applications are being used within organizations. The on-prem is a little bit easier because you've got control of that area, but it's the cloud environment where you have to understand what users are getting access to applications. So you've got to start with something like a CASB platform, which is Cloud Access Security Broker, to go and identify what applications people are using on the internet.
So what if, because that's quite interesting, that pre-scoping phase is really important, because you've got to see what you've got. How would we extend that to on-prem, because there's you're gonna have to understand that piece as well, because I think it's also important not just to kind of concentrate on the internet and things leaving your network, what we've got currently on-prem. Currently, it's more of a, networks go in, we look at firewall rules, we do that kind of stuff. What else?
Yeah, and that's where you're right. The on-prem stuff needs that collaboration between the apps teams and the infrastructure teams and networks and security.
Yeah.
Because VPN was easy. You punched a hole through your firewall, simple as. It gave you users layer 3 access into the network. They can get to the applications that need to because they've got full network access. Now, if you're restricting that from a ZTNA perspective, you have to know the idiosyncrasies of the security wrapped around an application, but also how the user gains access to that application. Now, some of it you may need to give a layer 3 access point from the client into your on-premise applications, because that's the only way the application will work, because you have to do full authentication through. Some, which will be a little bit more newer applications, you're able to hand off that authentication to those applications. So you may not necessarily have to give full network access. Some you may have an endpoint application component on the corporate device, which does that communication between the application via the ZTNA broker network to be able to then get into the on-premise application. But it needs really the expertise around the application, how it's behaving, which application and which users need the access to that application. You also need the collaboration security of, right, okay, well, they can get access, but actually from a security standpoint, I do not want to allow them to download any of that information from that application because it needs to stay in the building.
Yeah.
So the controls are there from a security aspect as well. Then from a networks component, it is, okay, we've got to build the transit between the user and the application itself. And that's where I say the merging of collaboration between those different functional areas, we're seeing to be a lot more conducive within organizations, because they're realizing they're all interdependent of each other and we can't work in silos anymore. Yeah.
No, definitely. I'd like to see, I'd like to see how that framework begins and starts, because I think, a good scoping or design it right at the beginning, where you set out those principles, or at least those points that you're going to try and comply to, is the only way you'll be able to measure that success that ZTNA, whatever framework is that gives you. So sorry, Harry, I mean, for once, I mean, you stayed quiet for a long time, I must admit.
I'm absorbing all the information because it's a new topic for me, and it's obviously we did the network access control, which was interesting. This is definitely in the same zone. I feel like this is almost very, very kind of granular detail, almost to the point where the more I'm listening, the more I think cost, because the analysis is required. And scoping. I mean, how is the elephant in the room cost with these things, or is it quite cost effective?
I don't think it is actually, Harry, because there's clearly a cost, but the reality is the infrastructure is there from the vendors providing the technology, and they know that the cost handoff, I suppose, is replacing a VPN technology, or it's replacing an MPLS technology as well at the same time. So they've got to be cognizant of how they're presenting that cost. There's got to be value to the organization, and that is more granular access, more control, not only on-prem but in cloud, but also the cost can't be exponential compared to replacing VPN or MPLS networks. So they're all very cognizant of that area of making sure that the cost is in balance in regards to an organization, but being able to provide more value to them as well.
Definitely. It's got to be a better product and better product experience.
When you look at the advancement of breaches and how people are trying to expose company information, they're getting more clever on how they're doing this. So obviously the technologies we use to protect ourselves, or we use to kind of give ourselves more visibility, we're going to have to change them. We can't just keep with those legacy products. So there's a cost in that anyway. Unless you want to get caught out. So it's no different to just your evolution of your technology footprint. It's going to happen, or it should do anyway. But okay. I tell you, I mean, this is another one where we probably do need to do a part 2 and 3, and we said so maybe we'll put this in for kind of next year, where maybe one of the ones we meet up.
Definitely. I mean, I think a next episode would definitely be good to maybe have some deployment scenarios, like actually going through a customer journey of this. They were here, and then this in place, and now these are the results. And maybe that's a 3 to 6 month window where we actually, not just an initial thing. We have had a question come through actually from Jeremy. I'm going to read this out to you guys. You can replace MPLS, NAC, and VPN with ZTNA and actually reduce costs and network complexity. So that's what he said. So I think he's in agreement with you guys, looks like.
Okay, yeah. It's one of the, there's different pieces of ZTNA, but yeah, that is one we just spoke about. It's definitely an area where, me being in say the service provider or networking would be where I see, actually, that's a good positioning for someone wanting to move away or evolve their transport. Yeah, because there's definitely benefit in there. Yeah, which we didn't have before. So yeah, thanks for that, Jeremy. Luckily it wasn't a difficult one. But okay.
It's obviously the content's landed well. But no, I think we can wrap it up. So Richard, thank you so much for joining and sharing your expertise. We will definitely book another session. We may end up doing it in person, and we may end up inviting everybody to somewhere in London to do it. So
yeah. But it's got to be in London. It's got to be in London. Yeah.
Just have to get the train, Harry.
Yeah.
Regularly there. And Jan, thank you so much. Do we have one next week?
We are looking at doing one. I think that's going to be the last one. So I think it'll be a Christmas jumper one. All right. Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Richard.
Thanks, Jan. Thanks, Harry.
Thanks, Harry. Bye.
Bye.